Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to Risk of Rain Returns. This is the game that we're going to do a review of today. If you're just catching up, I'm trying reviews out at the moment. It's all very off the cuff, from the hip. I'm not interested in writing scripts, I am not that type of person. And as far as objective ratings or anything, the closest to concrete and consistent is that per $5 the game asks of me, I ask it give me an hour of clean fun in return. In this case, Risk of Rain Returns, I've really enjoyed my time with this. This has been brilliant. It's $21.95 Australian, which we will call an even 4.5 hours, right? So if you give me 4.5 hours game, then I'll gladly give you that money, and it has done. I've been playing it non-stop since it came out. I have 10 other games on the review pile at the moment, but this jumped the queue. So it's been all consuming. So if that's all you need to know, worth the time, worth the money, brilliant, addicting, crack. Now, what is this game? It's a classic roguelike experience. It is a remake of the original Risk of Rain. Now, uniquely, I haven't played the original Risk of Rain. This is my first time with it. I played a lot of Risk of Rain 2. We're talking like 400 hours. I love Risk of Rain 2. It's probably one of my favorite roguelike experiences out there, and I played it multiplayer with a bunch of mates. Now, this I've only really been playing single player. However, the multiplayer is working from what I've heard. It was really rickety back in the day, like peer-to-peer dropouts. It essentially was not a multiplayer. So that's one of the main changes, I suppose, if you're nostalgic for it. But as I said, I'm not nostalgic because I never played the first game. The perspective is obviously very different to Risk of Rain 2. There will be comparisons between the two. It's sort of side on, and it comes from that era of, how do you put it, like two hands on the keyboard sort of games, which I almost violently react to because for whatever reason I don't have any touchstones there. Binding of Isaac's one that comes to mind. There are people that, have nostalgia for it, but if you tried to play Binding of Isaac and you'd never played it before today, you might have a hard time with the controls. And the same thing goes here. However, after spending, it wasn't immediate, but like an hour or two with it, it started to make sense. There are a couple of different layouts. You can pick one that uses the mouse, though I personally wouldn't recommend it because I don't really know what the point of it is. You don't really have mouse look. You don't have mouse aim. You have left and right aim. And the tricky thing is that you have to point in the direction and then press fire in that direction. So if you're running left and you fire, it's going to go left, essentially. Outside of some exceptions, like the Huntress tracks targets regardless of their facing. So it might be more, I found it a bit more confusing trying to use the mouse, because if you click on the right side of your character to fire while you run left, it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. Game's not designed that way. So at first it feels kind of clunky and dated, and in a way it is, because this is the original design from bloody 10 years ago or something. However, it becomes quite natural and organic after your 20th run. And I've been running non-stop on this. I've unlocked a few characters. You start with Huntress and Commando, which are pretty, basic rounded characters. One's more of a glass cannon than the other. But I've unlocked Bandit, bloody Engineer. That's everyone's favorite from Risk of Rain 2. The Risk of Rain 2 had a DLC for the Void Boy. I can't remember what he's actually called. That's what I call him, the Void Fiend or something. That's my main. So I doubt he'll be in this. But apparently a lot of sensibilities from the second game have been put into this remastering. So they've taken some lessons learned. Even though it's a different perspective, it's a third-person shooter more, this still has some of that in there. For example, the alternate upgrades or ultimate skill slots for your characters, I don't believe the first game had that. It was just fixed. Now you can unlock alternates for each of the 4 slots, and you can do that through Prism trials, or I think they're called something different in this, but essentially you can do trials. They're like mini tutorial challenges. If you pass them, you'll unlock an alternate skill for each of the 4 slots. But interesting, and I like this a lot, you can just grind. So it will say in text, unlock this ability by doing this trial, or kill a bloody 1,000 dudes with this character. So the more you play the character, eventually you'll just unlock the 4 skills, which I think is really good. I don't particularly care for the sort of little trials and challenge scenario side things. I just like the core of the game, which I haven't really discussed. I'm kind of assuming, sorry, that people know more about it, being that, well, like I said, I have a pretty storied history of Risk of Rain 2. Essentially, yeah, look, it's roguelike, run-based. You pick out your character, you go through this 2D environment left to right. At first, it's really fiddly because there's a verticality and a very strict platforming to it. And because of the way that power creep works in this game, you know, with double jumps and jetpacks and speed bonuses and all that sort of stuff, your ability to get to some areas can be limited. In fact, there might be parts of the level you can't actually get to, and it gets quite fiddly. But you start to realize that, you know, if you can't do it, then just leave it and come back if you've got, you know, like a double jump feather or something like that. So yeah, it can seem a little bit unrefined because you have to find the end of level teleporter to activate the boss and then travel to the next level. However, you might go, I don't know, what's an example? You start randomly on the map. Maybe you go in the wrong direction for 3/4 of your run all the way up, and then you have to double back sort of thing. You do want to sort of scrub the levels for loot as much as possible. You just buy these chests and open them. I will say there's not a lot of agency, unless it's somehow unlocked later. I think this is a sensibility of Risk of Rain Returns, that it is a lot more random. In Risk of Rain 2, you would have things like recyclers, where you could scrap things and then potentially buy more upgrades from dispensers throughout it. This isn't that. This just has random drops. Occasionally you'll have 3 things to choose from and you pick one, but that's really the extent of it. So yeah, you don't have a lot of agency over your build construction diversity. The most agency you really have is how hard you're going to flog through the level and try and take on the boss. I mean, you could argue the mountain shrine you can activate, which doubles the strength of the boss, doubles upon doubles. So if you get 2 mountains, you're going to have to fight 4 bosses at the end. But I still hold to my philosophy of Risk of Rain 2 in that only cowards don't press the mountain shrine. So, so I press it no matter what. So in my mind, there is no agency. You have to take the mountain because you just have to. But look, it's really, really fun. It's really brilliant. And from the, I don't know if it'll be a unique perspective, because I think there was a lot, no offense to the original OG fans, but I think there was a lot of zeitgeist behind Risk of Rain 2. And I represent probably a large majority of the base that have played Risk of Rain or the Risk of Rain games, in that we got in on Risk of Rain 2. It had more mainstream appeal. Even though I enjoy indie games, Risk of Rain 1 slipped past me. So I feel that there's a lot of people that are more familiar with 2, and so this would be kind of almost like a new game. However, you do have to go over the mental hurdles that you'll put in your own way, being that the controls feel foreign. You know, I was going to say clunky, but they work. They work quite well. But the mechanics, even though you've got same monsters, same characters in many ways, like there's a lot of cool, like it's not nostalgia, but it's a familiarity. So I'm recognizing all this crap that I know from the second game, but it's really cool to see them essentially in a different game, in a different perspective, different art style, all that, but still very similar. So it's weird. It's not nostalgia, but this is this bizarre familiarity. If you can get over the fact that it is actually very difficult, very, very difficult and very different from the sort of controls that you're probably used to, or the muscle memory from the second game, expecting characters to do certain things that they can't do in this, you know, once you can get over those hurdles, there's actually a really good game under here. But I do feel that there may well be some people that will play it for like an hour or 2 inside of the refund window, bounce off it, refund it, reinstall Risk of Rain 2. But I think that might be just the nature of the beast, that it is, in a way, even though so much of it is similar and familiar, it plays very, very differently. But yeah, so far I've really, really enjoyed myself with it. It looks like there's a whole bunch of characters to unlock. There's a whole bunch of content. Like, I've barely scratched the surface. But the other thing, when you've got a good, clean roguelike, or roguelite as it were, then the run has to hold up on its own. So your first run or your 500th run should still feel like fun. And so this actually has that secret sauce, that very difficult to define gameplay loop that's just solid and good fun. And I've been just doing just one more just one more. Like I said, this jumped the queue in front of all the other stuff that I'm slated to review at the moment. And this is absolute blast, basically. I can't believe I left it this long in the video to mention the soundtrack. I love the Risk of Rain 2 soundtrack, especially the final level song, Rain, formerly known as Purple, something on the nose like that, but whatever. This Chris, what's his name, that does the soundtrack is brilliant, and he did this one as well. And you know what? I think I like this soundtrack more because every second song in this sounds like the one I just mentioned from Risk of Rain 2. So I have one really favorite song from Risk of Rain 2, and I can hear it in about 4 different songs in this. So again, if you're coming from this back to front perspective where this is like your second Risk of Rain game, and I'm sure I'm not the only person that, and you like the soundtrack, that might be enough for you to buy this, to be perfectly honest, because this soundtrack absolutely smashes, man. You got these wild guitar solos just ripping through it. It's almost distracting. You're focused in, you're trying to combat roll and avoid getting your bloody shit kicked in, and then you hear this electric music, and oh my god, it just you almost stop and die. It's really good. The game can feel very cruel, but I think it's the limitations of, how would you put it? I talk about this often when a game that has a good arc to it from the beginning to the end with the power creep and building on mechanics, right at the end of the game is when it starts to break itself with the stretched mechanics, right? Where you put too many enemies on, like you start to feel the system collapse because it's under too much strain. I know I'm talking very sort of intangibly, but maybe you understand. And the games that don't have a very good loop start falling apart earlier in the piece. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this loop, but it is a little bit dated, and I'm spoiled because Risk of Rain 2 kind of took it in an organic, better direction. And because of the limitations of you walk so slowly when you're firing, it is very fiddly to choose the direction that you're firing, especially when there's 10,000 dudes on top of you. The game ramps in difficulty so hard, but because you are in that 2D perspective, left and right, and you often only have one ability that gives you iframes, if that, like Engineer and I think Enforcer, oh geez, bloody Judge Dredd character, he's so cool, I wish he was in number 2, but I'm getting distracted. But like, they don't even have evades or escapes, so you can find yourself getting to a point, like Engineer's a good example, where your turrets are on cooldown, and you can't afford to stop, and there's too much shit running after you at the same move speed as you. So you sort of, what are you going to do? Just run in a line for 30 seconds until you can put down a turret? You know, so like, I'm not trying to be too nitpicky or anything like that, but the game, it has to be compared to Risk of Rain 2. Risk of Rain 2, a great run ends when, you know, your computer almost crashes because there's so much shit on the screen, but like, it's kind of satisfying, the epic conclusion. And some of these runs, the way that they end, and I'm not trying to cope or anything like that, but it feels less that it was just an overwhelming spectacle battle and more that the limitations of the 2D perspective and trying to evade with almost no evasion tools is what undoes you. And it gets a little bit frustrating. And the readability is actually kind of low when it comes, you know, what had killed me. It will say on the splash screen at the end, but you know, if you're trying to sort of reverse engineer and figure out what the real problem was in the fight, it becomes a little bit too difficult. But anyway, this is nitpicky in the end of it. So yeah, Risk of Rain returns. It's brilliant. It's great. If you have nostalgia for the original, I'd be curious how different this is. Does it, you know, what does it bring to the table? Like I said, from what I understand, it's mostly been touched up. Probably graphically, right? But I can't tell. It looks really good as well. It might not necessarily come across, but once you've got it booted up and playing, it feels good, it looks good. So whatever they've modernized in it seems to have worked well for someone like me that's coming into it fresh. But I would be curious what sort of series veterans think about this. Is it just more of the same and they're asking for the same price tag again? Like, I'm not sure, but as far as coming onto my radar now that I'm aware of the series, you know, there's probably an argument to be made about doing something like that. You know, if one of your sequels in a series pops off in mainstream appeal, which Risk of Rain 2 absolutely did, right? There's probably something to be said about doing exactly this, touching up the original, bringing it forward, because you now have a new market that will probably scoop it up on the goodwill. So, but that's another whole discussion to be had. But for what it's worth, I don't think I've seen that really happen, and I'm glad they did it, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have picked Risk of Rain up because I was happy with 2. But now that this is on my radar, here we go. Anyway, look, I don't want to waffle, but I find that kind of interesting, this weird back to front because your sequel popped, bringing your originals back up into a more contemporary setting with a bit of a touch-up. And again, with the sensibilities from number 2, the way that the ability system unlocks work and a few more options in there. Yeah, I think it's quite cool. Anyway, highly recommended. Worth your time, worth your money. I'll be playing this off channel for sure. Maybe we'll do a stream or something like that. We can give multiplayer a bit of a go. And absolutely more than your money's worth. You could drop your $20 or whatever it is on this, and you're not going to run out of anything to do for bloody ages. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being. I'll catch you guys on the next one.